and welcome while we read about Lincoln's inaugural addresses. Now, an inaugural address is a speech that a brand new president gives right after they've been sworn in. They come in, they put their hand over the Bible, and the Supreme Court Chief Justice, give a little speech thing, and they say, "I swear to be a good president," and all that stuff. And once they're made president, they give a speech. That speech is their inaugural address. And Lincoln, since he was elected twice, gave two. And these were Lincoln's visions for the country. These were, at the time, this is how he saw things going, and this is what he wanted for the country. So there are two. There's his first inaugural address in 1861 at the beginning of the Civil War, and then there's his second inaugural address towards the very end of the American Civil War. And they're quite different. And so we're going to be looking at these. So in Lincoln's first inaugural address, Lincoln promised not to interfere with the institution of slavery where it already existed, and pledged to suspend the activities of the federal government temporarily in areas of hostility. However, he also took a firm stance against secession and seizure of federal property. The federal property he's talking about in this instance would be Fort Sumter. So his first inaugural address basically is well, let me just read it to you. So this is a couple excerpts from his inaugural address, because his first inaugural address is considerably longer than his second one. I have no purpose, directly or indirectly, to interfere with the institution of slavery in the states where it exists. I believe I have no lawful right to do so, and I have no inclination to do so. I understand that a proposed amendment to the Constitution has passed Congress. This would be the Corwin Amendment that we read about earlier, to the effect that the federal government shall never interfere with the domestic institution of the states, including that of persons held to service, slavery. Holding such a provision to now be implied constitutional law, I have no objection to its being made express and irrevocable. Lincoln's first inaugural address announces Lincoln's intention to respect the rights of states in regard to slavery. Like Lincoln said, I have no purpose. I don't have a desire to interfere with the institution of slavery in the states where it already exists. I believe I have no lawful right to do so. Why is he saying these things? Because Lincoln desperately wants to end this idea of secession. At that time, the states were leaving. At that time, there was conflict over what's going to happen at Fort Sumter. And so that's what he's speaking to. His second inaugural address is quite different, however. His second inaugural address happens on March 4th, 1865, towards the end of the American Civil War. President Lincoln delivered his second inaugural address, his inaugural speech on said week. Weeks of wet weather turned Pennsylvania Avenue into a sea of mud. So you can imagine the White House on Pennsylvania Avenue, and there's just long stretches of mud for the streets because they didn't have paved streets back then. Nevertheless, thousands of people came out to see the president standing tall behind the Capitol dome, a reminder of the strength of his administration throughout the war. In a little over a month, and just after the official end of the Civil War, Lincoln was going to be assassinated. And this speech is considered one of the most eloquent, well said in American history. So here's a little excerpt of Lincoln's second inaugural address. If we shall suppose that American slavery is one of those offenses which, in the providence of God, must needs come, but which, having continued through his appointed time, he now wills to remove, and that he gives to both North and South this terrible war, as the woe to those by whom the offense came, shall we discern therein any departure from those divine attributes which the believers in a living God always ascribe to him? Fondly do we hope, fervently do we pray, that this mighty scourge of war may speedily pass away. Yet if God wills that it continue, until all the wealth piled by the bondman's 250 years of unrequited toil shall be sunk, and until every drop of blood drawn with the lash shall be paid by another drawn with a sword, as was said 3,000 years ago, so still it must be said, the judgments of the Lord are true and righteous altogether. So, in the second paragraph of the speech, in his second inaugural address, Lincoln starts with a description of the situation in 1861, describing what was going on during his first inaugural address, when everyone was scared of war coming. The paragraph then switches to a clear description of the position of the two sides, all the while placing blame squarely on the South for ultimately ensuing the events, for causing the events, because slavery. Of the South, Lincoln states one of them would make war rather than let the nation survive. And of the North, he comments, the other would accept war rather than let it perish. I hope you're learning, and I hope you're having fun figuring out a little bit of what was going on in Lincoln's mind.